Good evening, everyone. My name is Joanne Nodal, and I'm with the Brazoria County Master Gardeners, and we're very appreciative of Keep Pearland Beautiful for hosting our monthly garden lectures. This evening, our guest speaker is Stephen Brueggerhoff. He is the horticulture agent, agri-life horticulture agent with Brazos County, and we welcome him here. This is going to be a fun talk because a lot of us don't realize that in our area, there's a lot of great vegetables that you can grow in the fall and the winter and have a whole new crop of good veggies to eat. The Brazoria County Master Gardeners are volunteers who work with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension to improve gardening skills throughout the community. We share our gardening knowledge through the community with service and outreach, gardening training, and educational programs like this one. So I'm glad you could join us tonight. And Stephen, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Joanne. And this is a pleasure to serve our community in Brazoria County, as well as visit with you for a little bit of time. Y'all may not know this, folks, but I was the horticulture agent for Brazoria County. Now it's Kimberly Mayer. She's doing a fantastic job, but we have great support from master gardeners like Joanne that are helping to promote the best practices of gardening in our region. Now I'm the horticulture agent for Brazos County. So that's the Twin Cities, College Station and Bryan. It's a pleasure to feel settled and be serving my community, but we're going to talk a little bit about cold crops, right? That's like broccoli, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kale, yum. These are great plants that we can work with successfully in the fall. Now you can work with some of these plants in the springtime, but you tend to be a little bit more successful as the season starts to cool down a little bit as we head into winter. So let's see if I can get this going. There we go. Of course, as Joanne had mentioned, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service of Brazos County, as well as Brazoria County, offers practical how-to education programs. They're based on university research to help your quality of life. And we do that through different types of initiatives. We have this one program called the Earthkind Landscaping Program. There's another one that still is viable. It's called Path to the Plate. Think of it like farm to table, right? So you know farm to table programs. This is AgriLife's version of that, Path to the Plate. So when you're growing any kind of vegetable, or if you're into ornamental landscaping around your house, or you're thinking about creating an orchard or possibly even a vegetable garden, the best thing to get a good foot on the ground is to decide what your purpose is. Why are you growing this garden? Is it a vegetable garden that you're growing for an entire family, for your neighborhood, or just for yourself? What kind of varieties grow best in the area that you're in? Now, I know living on the Gulf Coast in Brazoria County, I lived in Pearland and Friendswood. It was great. I had a great time while I was there, great communities, but it's a little bit different than it is gardening here in College Station. So you've got to figure out what kind of varieties grow best for the region that you're in, and what can your soil bear? And if you don't have an understanding of that, you're going to be challenged with, whatever enterprise you're doing. Always think about the goals that you're trying to achieve for this, what varietals are available. So I fall into this trap, and I know you probably do as well. 2 months ago, I thought, oh, it's time to plant garlic. So I started looking around for garlic, and it is not available. I was schooled by a local nursery, and they said, Stephen, now you know garlic is really not going to be available till it's time to be planting it, and that's around this time of year. Late October is when you'll start seeing garlic cloves available at your local feed stores, etc. So you get what I'm saying with that. You've always got to think about the season and the seasonality of the vegetables that you're trying to grow. So what are available? You can get plants by seed, certainly, but you'll have to do a little bit of planning way ahead of time to get ahead of the curve on this. And we'll talk a little bit about the best time to be sowing seed for plants like kale or cabbage as well. Always look at your site, right? This goes without saying. I know maybe you're thinking about adding, giving a little bit of uh, a benefit to yourself by planting a vegetable garden in the backyard, or you could be doing this in your front yard. If your HOA allows it, you can do this in your front yard. I promise you, folks, your neighbors are not going to pick your vegetables, right? So you might consider that as well, wherever you have space, adequate space to do this. But when you're trying to spec out a space around your house or maybe your neighbor's house, think about where the sun is. These plants are going to require a certain amount of sunlight per day, and you can't skip on that, right? So it's better to try to provide a little bit of shade rather than trying to make up and cut down a tree to get more sunlight in there, right? So always consider the surrounding houses around your property, other structures like trees. Trees will provide shade, and even a couple of hours of less sun exposure will make a big difference in the kind of vegetables that you're growing, quality as well as size. And think about, the drainage of the soil that you have as well. So I'm speaking to the choir. These are just some reminders for you. You have to do a little bit of preparation prior to actually putting your fork in the ground. Now, as I mentioned, plants, we're going to go over the garden basics. Plants require 8 hours of exposure to sunlight. Now, there are some vegetables that would benefit with a little bit of shade from other plants that are larger than that. You can always design your garden bed appropriately, but make sure they get at least a good 8 hours exposure of sunlight per day. You've got great soil conditions, right? We're always shooting for that sandy loam. Our Myself and my colleagues, we do talk about soil texture and how plants function in that environment. And we know with ornamental plants, there are some plants that are more appropriate for a rain garden or that may have an extensive root mass that we're working with. Vegetables are a little bit different, right? Vegetables are one and done. Perennials are those plants we're trying to put in perpetuity, or maybe annuals for that, a little bit of seasonal color. But vegetable gardening is we take a little bit of a different approach. So you're always thinking about turning over plants in that environment. Therefore, you have to make sure that the soil conditions are just right for that kind of exercise. Always make sure you have access to water and access to nutrients. So the images that you see right here is a combination of pictures that I took while I was in Brazoria County. Oh, by the way, folks, if you are in the area in Brazoria County, go on down to Angleton. There's a wonderful demonstration garden in Angleton that is managed by the Brazoria County Master Gardeners. It's called the Brazoria Environmental Education Station. We lovingly call it BEES, and they do have programs down there every once in a while. And these are pictures from that location. The one in the upper right-hand side is one of the beds, a series of beds. They may not exist in this form anymore, but I was there, it's going on almost 10 years now, or close to that. So the beds have changed over time, but this gives you an idea of the kind of environment that we're working with in Angleton. The one on the lower right-hand side is a bed that was constructed up against a building, a large garage type structure. It had a lot of reflected light coming off of the side of that building. That is going to have an environmental impact on the vegetables that you're growing. This was, I think that this picture was right before we started putting in turnips as a cover crop. And then the one on the lower left-hand side is out in Galveston County. That's at the demonstration garden that the Galveston County Master Gardeners are managing. We call that the Discovery Garden. You can see similarities between all of these. Each one of these places, we were growing vegetables in raised beds so that we can manipulate the soil environment. The one on the lower left-hand side, that is literally working with the ground that we had, but adding organic matter to that. So, just to kind of sum this up, make sure you're providing your vegetables with all of the wonderful benefits of the resources that they'll need so that you can be a successful vegetable gardener. Now, as far as frames, and there's a point to this, folks, it's not just a picture of the different types of or different styles of materials that you can use when you're building a raised bed. Well, actually, that's what exactly what this is. Uh, I've got an example of different types of structures that have been used in creating beds. Now, the one on the lower right-hand side, really long bed. It's got it might look familiar to you. Typically, the house that I've purchased, and I just purchased a house, so you can congratulate me later, but um, we bought this house in April, and it comes with traditional wooden framed beds. That's not a picture of that, but you get the idea. Galveston County, that's where that picture was taken on the lower right-hand side. That is a traditional bed made out of wooden frame. The one on the upper right-hand side, that is an experiment. That again is at the Galveston County the demonstration garden, and that's a composite material. The master gardeners had an opportunity to spend a little bit of money. It's probably one of the most expensive bed frames that you could buy, but they thought it was worth it to demonstrate the different kind of materials that you can use for framing your raised bed. Lower left-hand side, you're very familiar. There's different brand names for those kind of corrugated metal framed beds, and that was one that was being constructed out of the Galveston County uh, at the demonstration garden in Galveston County. But the material that we're probably going to have on hand are going to be the upper left and the lower right. You're either going to go out and buy wood or you're going to get cinder blocks. So the reason why I'm mentioning this, when you're building a raised bed, there are some things you need to think about. And one of them is what you're going to fill that with. Now, again, with the exception of the upper right-hand bed and the lower left-hand bed, right? The ones diagonal, upper left and lower right, we were actually digging into the soil, the existing soil that was there. But we have a raised bed environment to provide enough depth for some of the plants that we were working with. So again, we didn't obstruct that surface. Rather, we kind of tilled into it and then added incorporated media on top of that. Garden soil, you get it at bulk yards, whatever. Now, to get to what I sometimes I talk in circles, so I apologize for that. But the reason why I'm demonstrating this to you is because the plants that we're talking about, cold crops, they're going to need adequate space to grow in the bed that you're working with. So if you have a cinder block framed bed, you have a limited amount of space that you're working in, right? Typically, you're going to put about 2 or 3 cinder blocks on one end, line it with about 6 to 8 cinder blocks down the side for the length of it, and then, repeat and rinse on either side. So you got to spec out the interior of that bed, right? So that's something important to keep in mind. You have to know how much material you're going to buy. That's a measurement that you have to take of the interior of that framed of that cinder block bed, or if it's wooden frame, etc. So let's talk a little bit about spacing. In the upper right-hand picture, that is a picture of broccoli, right? And you can see we've added everything we could to that. You might notice if you look a little closely, you can kind of see some pine cones in there. We were experimenting with different materials to use for mulch in the vegetable bed. Folks, if you got extra pine cones, I mean, that's fine, but it's not. Anyway, it was an experiment. It doesn't acidify the soil. It just kind of looks pretty and is unique, but it's not necessary. We're just experimenting with it. So again, regardless of the frame that you're using, always measure the interior dimensions of that framed bed. It will dictate the kind of veggie type that you have, um, as well as the veggie type, as well as the spacing that it requires. So here's an example. You've got an 8 foot, 8 foot 8 inch by 4 foot 8 inch cinder block bed. That's measurements to the outside. The interior is going to measure 7 foot 4 by 3'4". Okay, and all you need is a tape measure to figure that out. Within that environment, because we have plants that are going to get large, and I know this from personal experience, growing out cabbage, when we say space the cabbage 2.5 to 3 feet apart in center, right? It may look like you've got a lot of space in between those plants. Lo and behold, almost 2 months later, those plants have filled in that space. So they require that much space, right? So in an environment that's 7'4" by 3'4", if you're planting out tomatoes or cabbages or even broccoli, you're probably, you can get away with 2 rows inside of that space, and you're going to be planting them 2 feet apart for cabbage. That's kind of squeezing them in there, right? Um, but in that environment, you'd be able to plant about 6 cole plants, and that means broccoli or cabbage or even Brussels sprouts. Even though they're growing more upright, more vertical, still they're going to need space because they will expand. And you can get about, so 6 cole plants, that means 2 rows, so about 3 plants per row. 6 plants inside of that entire cinder block bed. It may not seem like a lot, but folks, if you've grown out broccoli, you've got 6 plants in there, you're going to be growing it out for the neighborhood, right? Or maybe you'll get tired of broccoli after you have to harvest it for a while. Anyway, I'm teasing a little bit. So we figured out what the interior of that bed is, and we've estimated how many plants we can actually get in there. So if you're buying a flat of seedlings, or I guess if you get a flat of like 13 4-inch containers, you're going to use about half of those in the bed that you're creating. If it's a cinder block bed about the same dimensions. Now, as far as soil type goes, um, when you go to a, retail outlet that sells bulk soil, okay, so if you've got a bed that's maybe 20 feet long, like the one on the bottom view, the bottom right hand side, or if it's okay, I'm not supposed to name brand names, but if you got a Vigo bed or a Vicos bed, a knockoff bed, right? This one is about the one that you see in the upper right-hand side. This is one out at our demonstration garden in Brazos County. We didn't construct it correctly, so it's about 2 feet wide instead of 3 feet wide. We were going for 3 feet wide, and I didn't read the directions, and anyway, so there you go. Now it's 2 feet wide, and we're not going backwards. Approximately 2 feet wide, but by about 6 feet long, almost 8 feet long. That is going to require quite a bit of soil. Do you know how many bags of 2 cubic foot bags of soil it takes to fill up a bed like that? I do. It's about, let me think, what was it? 21 bags, right? So you got to have a truck or somebody with a strong back or a lot of patience and several days to do this. But fortunately, we had ordered some bulk soil from a local retail outlet to fill that, right? But you got to think that through, folks. Next time I'll think it through a little bit better. But when you go to a retail outlet that's selling soil in bulk, go for the garden soil. Garden soil is going to be comprised of 70% soil, right? So we say topsoil. Topsoil is a generic term that's used for a medium that doesn't really exist. So maybe topsoil is scraping from another, another place, or anyway, it's kind of misleading, the term topsoil. But figure out that what you're ordering is a material that has about 70% soil, right? Which does have a nutrient component in that. And then, or mineral content. It's going to have mineral content in there. That's important to remember. And the other 30% is going to be composted material. Okay, so that's important. When we're building a raised bed like what you see on the right-hand side, you need to have mineral content in that. And that's provided by the good old earth, right? If you're digging in the soil, you've already got a component of that is going to be comprised of minerals in there, where we derive some of our nutrients from. If you're building a raised bed, you're going to be buying garden soil, right? That's just a generic term used for it. It will be comprised of approximately 70% of soil, which has a mineral content in it, and then the other part is 30% composted material. So it's not all soil and it's not all composted material. It's a blend. In ground, if you're digging in the ground, the best thing to do is to add organic matter to that. So about 2 inches of compost into about 6 inches soil depth. Now, this is if you're preparing a bed in ground. Now, the challenge with long-term use of composted material over time, I'm not talking about 2 years. You're going to have to check this out maybe every 5 years. Have us commit to a soil test, even in a containerized bed like the one you see on the right-hand side. You can increase ammonium or calcium or magnesium, which can cause a deficiency, a nutrient deficiency. But again, folks, that's over time. When you're doing this, like this bed that you see in the upper right-hand side, that one was newly constructed this past year. So we're not going to have those kind of issues, at least for the next 4 or 5 years, but we are going to commit another soil test probably in about another 3 years just to see if there's any challenges with changes in pH or if there's any kind of measured nutrient deficiency that we can capture, right? And again, the best way to determine how much soil you need to add to that so you're not wasting your time or your money is just by measuring it out. When you're going to a soil yard, when you're going to a retail outlet that's selling bulk soil, they're going to sell it to you in cubic yards. When you go to the store and you get bagged product, that's cubic feet. So you're going to have to translate that information, right? When you're measuring this bed, like this Vigo bed you see in the upper right-hand side, I just measured the length times the width times the depth, and that gave me the number for cubic feet. But you're going to have to translate that into yards if you're going to a place that sells bulk soil. Fertilizing, we always like to stand up on our podium and we say, get a soil test. Now, because the bed that I showed you a few moments ago, the Vigo bed that was kind of tan colored and had metal corrugated sides, just for grins, we thought, well, best practice, we put in garden soil in there fresh off the truck, and we did commit a soil test to that. And we saw that it was great soil. It had great nutrient content in it. We felt satisfied with the place that we bought it from because we took that time. It's not necessary for you to do that. If you're establishing a new container, in essence, you're making a containerized planting, right? It's a container bed, um, raised bed. If you're establishing one like what you saw that we did, you don't need to commit a soil test to it. The soil will be good, right? As long as you get it from a reputable place. But if you're digging in the ground, you've got to get a soil test. It gives you an idea of the pH range that you're working with, also nutrient content, nutrient availability. Soil testing can be committed from Texas A&M AgriLife Extension does support a soil, water, and forage testing lab. And so from that, there are forms available from your local extension office. We have forms at our office. We also have these cute little marketing bags. They're convenient little brown bags that you can submit a sample to this lab. Realistically, it is about marketing, but there's nothing wrong with that, folks. It makes it more convenient for you to put it into this bag and then ship it off. Or if you're in the Twin Cities, you can always drive it over to the lab if you're here in town. But there's instructions on how to commit a soil sample, or you can meet with your horticulture agent. In this case, it's Kimberly Mayer, or maybe one of the Brazoria County Master Gardeners. We're more than happy to help guide you on how to take those soil samples. So get a soil test done. If you're digging in the ground, you got to know what the foundation of information to work with from this point out, right? Um, Prior to putting anything in the ground, a little bit of general prep information. A couple of weeks prior, put in a complete fertilizer, right? Estimate that it's going to be about 2 pounds for each 100 square feet or 30-foot row. Now, you may not be working in a large area like that. That's okay. Just go ahead and start dividing. Do a little bit of math for that. Maybe you've got 100 square feet is a 10 by 10 spot. That's the size of the room that I'm sitting in right now. It's quite a bit of area to be gardening in. So maybe yours is more modest, like, I don't know, 30 square feet. Just go ahead and make those divisions and then apply that fertilizer. If it's balanced 13, 13, 13 or 10, 20, 10, whatever you're using, go ahead and apply that, distribute it. It's not going to look like much, but trust me, it's enough for those plants to get started. Spray over the soil surface and then mix it into 2 to 3 inches. About a month after you transplant your plants into the ground. Doesn't matter if you're working with cabbage, kale, or Brussels sprouts or broccoli, you're going to be adding about the same amount of no, it's half of that. You're going to be adding about a pound, estimated about a pound of product per 30-foot row, right? So again, after about a month after you transplant it, because you've already prepped the soil, okay, maybe 3 weeks, 3 weeks to a month after putting them in the ground, fertilize them. Turns out that you're actually going to be applying about a tablespoon around each plant. Or if you've got a row, you can figure out how much you need to apply to that, depending on how much length of row you've got, and side dress it. Just kind of put it down a row along the line of plants that you've got. But it's going to work out to be about a tablespoon of whatever product you're working with around each one of those plants. That's just an example. What I just put up on the screen is an example if you're using ammonium nitrate, which I'm hoping you're not, but some folks may be using something with a really high nitrogen content to it. Practically, we're probably using something like ammonium sulfate, which is rated at 21% of that product, 21% of whatever product you've got. If it's 2100, 21% of that is nitrogen content, right? And you know, with that ratio, you're going to be applying about a cup per 30 foot of row. Anyway, if you want to get to the lab, we've got a QR code here. I believe this program is being recorded and available later, or you can look online using your favorite browser and just type in the words AgriLife Soil, Water, and Forage Testing Lab, and it'll get you there. I love this image up on the upper right-hand side when I was briefly mentioning soil pH. Turns out that in Brazoria County, if I remember correctly, if you're working directly in the soil, on average, I think your soil pH is somewhere between 6.5 to 6.8. You might get more, up towards 7 in certain areas of Brazoria County, but I think in general, cruises somewhere between 6.5 and 6.8, which it turns out is the sweet spot for a lot of the vegetables that you're working with. Okay. And that's just a slide that I borrowed from one of my colleagues. I just happened to be in a conference and took a picture. I'm sure they're fine with it. It's an extension colleague, therefore it's an extension image. All right, irrigation. Irrigation is mother's milk. You've got to work with water. Plants need water. And you got to figure you work with what you got, folks. Hopefully, the bed that you've located on your property is close to a spigot or close to some sort of irrigation that you can tie into. You can water by hand, which I still do in certain areas of my backyard. Again, I just moved into the house. We got to build a little bit of equity and save a little bit of money to get something like that installed. But it is back-breaking work, and especially if we've got a drought-like conditions, even in winter, right? Get a little dry in winter. You got to take that into consideration. Work with what you got. Make sure that however you apply that water, that you're providing uniform moisture to that, because that will affect how the plants grow, how those vegetables produce, the fruits of your labor. If you miss a watering, sometimes you'll see that in the plant itself. You need to consistent watering across the board during the development of these fruits is very important. Cells are dividing, and when you get a growth spurt, you want to keep up with that with even moisture. So, how much do you water? We're not even going to get into that, folks. Just letting you know, make sure that you get consistent water out to those plants. And you can use buckets, or if you do have an irrigation system you're installing. Traditionally, I grew up with this kind of, we call it the leaky pipe. It's a porous black hose. It doesn't cost as much, but it kind of distributes water a little randomly, haphazardly. I like this newer type, well, newer. I think this kind of irrigation is this brown kind of piping that you see on the bottom picture. That one has graduated holes that are spaced across that, and it has a little bit of a screen on there to um, kind of sift out any particulates that. Anyway, it's an elegant system. If you can afford it, go ahead and purchase it. It'll help you out in the long run. And I've had great success with piping like that rather than the porous black hose. Um, don't just install this. There is don't, I would suggest not to just install it to a spigot directly. Because this is an irrigation system, you will have to put a backflow preventer on that so you can protect your piping in your house. So it's a little bit more information that goes along with this. Just understand it's not just going out and buying a pipe and then hooking it up to your spigot. You do have to put a backflow preventer onto that to protect yourself. You can add a timer that will relieve you of those duties where you can sit on the veranda drinking a mint julep and watching your garden grow. I know it's a little bit simplified, but you get the idea. Now, we're going to stop talking about infrastructure after this and start talking about the plants, which I know that's what you're here for. Frost and insect protection. You do this through row covers. Row cover offers estimated approximately 2 to 4 degrees of frost protection. We're getting into with fall gardening, we do need to think about frost and freezes, and you need to be prepared for that inevitability. So you can buy these kind of white mesh like material. It's almost transparent. The material has been developed to allow penetration of light. You're going to have reduction of light, but it's not going to be much. It is slightly porous, so at least you get a little bit of oxygen exchange with the atmosphere and the interior of whatever you've covered. Uh, the cool thing about this kind of materials, and again, these materials have been around for quite a number of years. They do provide wind protection as well, and you can exclude insects if you decide to cover your garden area. Of course, if you've got hog wire, you can put that out. It keeps out the deer and gardeners. Uh, I was trying to make a joke. So the one on the lower right-hand side, I went to, what was it, Avery Island? There's an island in Louisiana run by a family, McElhaney. I think it's the where the chili peppers are grown and the chili and the Tabasco sauce is made. They they literally have some of their plants surrounded by this hog wire to keep out the tourists. I thought that was kind of cool. I love this picture. When I moved when went away to college, I'm from Texas, went away to the University of Washington in Seattle, came back, bought a house in Round Rock, Texas, and this was my first year gardening. I was so proud. I grew a leek that was almost bigger than my head. It's a horrible picture, but kind of blurry, but I just love this picture too. That was a younger Stephen, several decades ago. So there is a time for everything. And this is an example of a planting guide that we have developed for Brazos County. You have one similar for Brazoria County. Maybe it's a little bit off by a month or like a couple of weeks, but you get the general idea. Let me show you really quickly. These are the kind of plants that you can put in the ground now. Now, we're a little bit late on some of these plants. The kind of light green shading that you see means that's a marginal planting time, right? So it's now the middle of November. If you didn't get your Brussels sprouts in by transplant, in early November, it's okay, folks. You can still, if you can still find some transplants, get them in the ground now, maybe in the next couple of weekends, you'll be fine. Down in Brazoria County, you still got a little bit of time. It's a little bit of warm. It's a little bit warmer down there, so you're probably right on time for broccoli, Brussels sprouts, bok choy, etc. Just go ahead and pay attention to these kind of documents. And your document for Brazoria County is available through the Extension Office, as well as a link from the Brazoria County Master Gardeners. Great segue, don't you think? So, our volunteer service organization, Texas Master Gardeners, are an outstanding resource to the community, right? There's only one horticulture agent for each county, but there's quite a number of residents in each one of those counties. And the beauty of working with such a great group of volunteers like the Brazoria County Master Gardeners is we can be more effective getting into the community with our volunteers. So that means we have local resources for download available from our support group's website. So go to the Brazoria County Master Gardeners website where you can find documents like your planting guide for your area. Now, this time of year, of course, it's a great time to be putting in fall vegetables, and we have quite a number that we can work with. You've got your cold crops, you've got your broccoli, your Brussels sprouts, your cabbage, etc. Cauliflower, it's a cold crop. But you can also put in garlic, onions, turnips. I didn't like turnips until I put them in the ground, right? They're delicious when they're roasted. Who knew? I was thinking of myself as a young child, where you turn your nose up at everything. Well, kind of suppress that. If you're 30 to 40 years old and you hated turnips growing up, try them again. They'll be fine. Well, folks, before I get into this, are there any questions? Anything from the peanut gallery?
There is one question, and it goes, Stephen, it goes back to talking about irrigating or providing water to your vegetable garden. Rose Meek was asking if you had an experience with solar irrigation kits.
No, I have not had experience with that. Um,
Me neither.
no. And you said that the person's name was Rose?
Rose, yeah.
Well, Rose, I I challenge you, or if you decide to explore and just experiment with a system like that, it doesn't have to be expensive or extensive. Just kind of experiment with this, and please report back to your to your master gardeners or your agent. Let them know how it works for you. But I've never tried a solar system. My experience with solar ponds or solar pumps has been I think I purchased the off-brand inexpensive one, so it's not been reliable for me. But I'm glad you brought that up, and Rose, I'm writing that down right now because I think I need to know a little bit more about that. It may be a
And I
question.
think
Go ahead.
I think we can we can do a little research and see if any of our master gardeners in Brazoria County have experience, and we'll share it with Rose and post it on our Master Gardener Facebook page.
That sounds super. Thank you so much for offering that, Joanne. That's wonderful. So, this time of year, it's the time to be working with a whole lot of plants in the fall. Carrots. You like carrots? You got to give them depth. Even the smaller ones, like I think there's a variety called Tom Thumb, it's stubby little carrot, but they're delicious. But you still got to give them depth, right? Well, let's talk a little bit about Brussels sprouts. Who knew that there were dozens and dozens of different varieties of Brussels sprouts? So spacing for Brussels sprouts is going to be the same that you would apply to cabbages or broccoli. Let's say you got a transplant. Okay, if you're working with Brussels sprouts or cabbages from seed, the best time to be starting them from seed in your area is probably late September or early October. Just start getting rocking out so you can plant them in time, get them in the ground, right about now. but you're going to want to get ahead of that at least a good couple of months prior to your first frost. So doesn't matter whatever cold crop you're working with, make sure you start germinating those seeds at least a couple of months ahead of that first frost. The spacing is going to be similar. You got about 2 to 3 feet apart. You can probably squeeze Brussels sprouts in about 2 feet apart on center, but 3 feet apart means you might have adequate space to start weeding around that. Now, keep in mind that the cooler temps will produce a higher quality sprout. So that's one of the reasons we're very successful with Brussels sprouts in the fall. We're working into more cooler temperatures that are, well, we hope, I've worn shorts for Christmas, but they come in at about 60 to 70 degrees ambient temperature. The cooler it is, the sweeter the taste of those sprouts. Now, I have met some individuals that insist that they take the leaves off of those stalks as they're emerging. Folks, that's not necessary. It doesn't it doesn't benefit. I don't think it does benefit planting if you're in a commercial setting, but if you're doing this at home, it's not necessary to pull those leaves up the stalk. If you insist on it, maybe half of them from the bottom so they're not touching the ground, right? So you can reduce the incidence of disease or fungal pathogens that might splash up off the ground. But we got to leave leaves on that. Remember, when we're growing vegetables, we're growing leaves. Focus on the leaves, focus on the plant, right? We're growing leaves. The fruit will follow if you're doing everything right. And we know that plants like Brussels sprouts, like most plants that I'm friends with, use photosynthesis to create energy for the plant. So you start plucking those leaves off, you're kind of reducing the ability of that plant to do that. So at home, maybe a couple of leaves, but don't denude the whole plant is not necessary. Now, there is a trick for growing Brussels sprouts. If you want to get a little bit better sprout development, top the plants at about 3 weeks. So topping just means, pinching out that meristem, right? So the meristematic point of that plant, where the plant is continuing to expand and elongate at the tip of it, go ahead and pluck that out. I just cut it away, cut it about 3 inches off of the top of that, or top the plants. And that's about 3 weeks before your anticipated first frost. Now, y'all may already be getting there. If you're putting in a transplant this weekend, just let it rock out for a couple of weeks, right? Get it settled in. Then go ahead and top it as those sprouts are developing. Kind of encourages them to get a little bit larger. Now, there are several different varieties that we can work with. Part of putting them in the ground is determining how many days to harvest how long you're going to have to grow them in the ground towards production. Now, keep in mind that Brussels sprouts in general are are adapted to colder temperatures. If we get a long duration hard freeze, that's a different story. But if we get frost overnight, the plants are going to be fine. They'll just be fine on that, folks. If you've got a variety like Diablo, you got about 110 days. That means once you put it in the ground, you start counting down to 110 days. Anticipate harvest in 110 days. Jade Cross is another varietal. It was the All-American selection winner of 1959. Um, I was born a little bit later than that. So anyway, Royal Marvel is another one. Comes in a little bit earlier, right? 85 days. Vigorous, uniform 1-inch sprouts. And then there's one that has been favored across the nation. I got this information from Cornell. Tasty Nugget comes in a lot earlier, produces a lot quicker, 78 days. That's what? That's a little bit over that's about 2.5 months. Vigorous hybrid, you get about 1.25 inch sprouts on them. So again, maybe you want to settle if you can find if you're when you go to a retail outlet, you are subject to whatever they have. But if you have the ability next year to purchase seed and start these on your own, you might want to consider one like Tasty Nugget. Kale. By the way, unless I've indicated where I got the image from, all of the images that I've taken, all of the images in this presentation, I've taken myself. This is the exception. These were taken by our colleagues at AgriLife Marketing and Communication. This was research trials down in Uvalde. One popular variety is called Red Boar. Starts producing about 50 days, right? Love it because it has maroon foliage. Not referencing the football team. I'm just saying it's got maroon foliage. Gets to be about 2 feet tall. Most of these are going to get to be about 2 feet tall. One that's very popular, dwarf blue curled, about 1.5 feet tall. Leaves are a little bit sweeter after it's had some cool down. I gave you a picture of some ornamental kale that they were growing out at this research station, Nagoya red and white. They are not, they are edible, but they're just not as good as some of these other varieties. So they're unique, and I just have that to show you you can work with these plants ornamentally. There are ornamental kale available as well. The crucifers. Woohoo! Let's talk about broccoli and cauliflower. What we're doing is we're growing flowers. We look at them as vegetables, but they're actually tightly wound, tiny little buds. We're producing a plant that we can harvest prior to bud break. And these are terms that we use for it. The broccoli head. When you get a large sprout, large cluster of flowers, we call that the head. Individual, so the entire structure is called the head. The individual stalks, it may have other little clusters. We can consider that to be a floret, and that's again circling some of the buds that will form flowers. Now, the intent for us is to try to harvest them before the buds start to separate a little, where the head kind of becomes a little bit open and the flowers open as well. So we want to get them before that. They're just a little bit sweeter. They're not focusing on true flower production at that point. Different types of broccoli. The main thing to keep in mind with broccoli is on average, you've got about 55 to 57 days on this, right? So growing these out, you've got almost 2 months prior to harvest. Oh, let me go backwards. Sorry about that. Some varieties that you will see consistently at the nurseries are Green Comet, produces 7-inch heads. Lieutenant is heat resistant. We were working with that variety down in Galveston County. Comes in at about 60 days, so it's a little bit earlier than some other varietals. And the cool thing about Lieutenant is it does produce adequate side shoots. So when you harvest the central head, you can still collect side shoots off of a variety like Lieutenant. Pac-Man was one of the go-tos, right? Came in really super early, about 50 days. Very, very productive. But this last year, I just couldn't find any Pac-Man. Wasn't available on the market. And then Waltham is an old heirloom varietal, comes in at about 74 days. As far as cauliflower goes, there's been some development in different types of hybrids. This is a picture that I took out of ones that I produced in my backyard when I was in Galveston County, when I was living in Clear Lake. And I grew out Snow Crown, which you see at the top, Graffiti, which is a named cultivar that's purple. Now, keep in mind, folks, the purple will fade when you cook it. Looks cool, and it tastes great. But, if you want to retain that purple color, just cut it fresh into your salads. And then cheddar. Cheddar was outstanding, very sweet, 68 days. Um, and if you want a brighter yellow color, you won't be blanching those heads. So here's what I mean by blanching. It's not the act of cooking. Well, kind of is. It's not cooking in your kitchen. What you're doing is you're protecting the head. If you have a variety like Snow Crown, to keep that head white, pure white, you're going to exclude sunlight. So that means taking those leaves and pulling them up over the head and securing it with a string or rubber band or whatever you have on hand, right? So you're wrapping the leaves over the head to prevent sun scald. This is what sun scald looks like. This is from ones that I grew out in Clear Lake. Left-hand side, as an experiment, I left them unblanched and they just started, the pigmentation started kicking in, kind of made them not as sweet, a little bit bitter, slightly bitter. One on the right-hand side, we just pulled those leaves up around that head and voila, we had a beautiful snow crown. So if you're growing cauliflower, white, exclude sunlight. yellow variety like cheddar, you can leave them unwrapped, or the purple ones, you can leave them unwrapped. That's fine. Here's some harvesting tips, really quick harvesting tips for broccoli. Tight head is ideal on the left-hand side. The open head's a little bit past its prime on the right-hand side. It just doesn't look perfect, right? Same thing with cauliflower. On the left-hand side, the flowers haven't quite expressed just yet. On the right-hand side, they've separated a little bit, and they do get slightly, not as sweet when they start to separate a little bit. Cabbages, I love cabbage. I didn't love cabbage until I started growing it. And I'm growing right now, I'm growing early Jersey Wakefield. It is not disappointed as far as the size of that head. I'll show you in just a minute what that looks like. Comes in at about 70 days. You get a really robust head. You can go with a crinkly Savoy cabbage, a little bit ruffled leaves. I just love the way that looks. Ruby Perfection is a red variety. Of course, I love the name Ruby Perfection. Comes in at 85 days. And then, of course, there's the Napa cabbage. If you look on the lower right-hand side, the image of those clusters of cabbage, they're more oblong. Or I've heard them commonly called Chinese cabbage. Anyway, they're Napa cabbage. That's what we know them as. They come in pretty quickly, about 45 days. So if you're just starting into cabbage and you're concerned you don't have enough time to wait around for those heads to develop for a variety like early Jersey Wakefield, you might consider a Napa cabbage. They are outstanding. I really love them, right? And they're disease resistant and they're very slow to bolt as well. This is
Hey,
an
Stephen,
image. Yes.
sorry to interrupt. Oh, I see you're talking about cabbage research next. Do you have any experience with kohlrabi? I'm not sure if I'm saying it right.
Kohlrabi, no, well, let me think. Kohlrabi. No, I'm drawing a blank.
Well, I think I'm not going to say it's a newer type of cabbage, but it's a variety of cabbage that I think is coming into to trend now. And we were curious to know if you'd had any experience with it.
No, I have not.
All
Romanesco.
right, we'll experiment.
There you go. Romanesco I have, which is kind of cool, but I don't have time to talk about Romanesco. But this is the cabbage research that I have out at the demonstration garden. Planted them September the 19th. These are pictures that I took almost quite 2 months later. And that bed is 2 feet wide. This is why we need to give those plants room to grow because they will not disappoint. They will get just as wide. Early Jersey Wakefield is the largest one that I have out there. The head hasn't quite formed. Remember, it takes quite a bit more time to develop the head appropriately, but I suspect by mid-December, early Jersey Wakefield will be ready for harvesting. It's an heirloom variety. Early Flat Dutch is the one in the center, a little bit more diminutive. I don't know if you can really make it out though, but it's got a really nicely tight packed head. It's almost ready to harvest right now, right? Smaller head on it, but I'm really looking forward to that. And then Ruby Ball, the foliage is just about as large or as wide as the early Jersey Wakefield. But I'm looking forward to trying that one out as well. We're not doing research just for harvest data. Of course, I'm documenting how big these plants are growing as I grow them out, wanting to see how they perform in our environment. I have not sprayed any pesticide on these because I don't have any evidence of insect damage. So what you see is what I got out there. So speaking of pests and disease management. Fall time, this is a general caveat, folks. There are very few that are present in the garden, not like there is in the spring. We still have pests and pathogens, but just doesn't seem to be about as many. But your best method for prevention and control is annual crop production for these cabbages. These are beds that we've been working with tomatoes in. We're going to turn them around and work with tomatoes this next spring. And I may not work, I may garden, I may put cabbage back in the same garden, but I'm not going to do that a third year in a row. I'm trying to reduce any incidence of persistent diseases that may be in the soil. Make sure you get adequate spacing. Again, cabbage, you got to get them about 2.5 to 3 feet apart. And so that's great spacing for those plants. Prune the lower leaves from ground contact. You really can't help that with cabbage, but other plants like Brussels sprouts, you can. Remove any leaf litter from the ground and always be diligent for insects like cabbage loopers, which we don't have any out there, but if we did, I would use methods that are not as intensive as some laboratory produced pesticides. So I would use a pheromone trap if I was trying to track them, or I just kind of, you can use little sticky yellow cards. Well, that's not really good for cabbage loopers. But anyway, if you see them in the on the plants, you just remove them by hand. You use the TAF method, TAF. Ask me what that is in a moment, TAF method. Or you can control them because these are moths. You can control them with a variety of Bacillus thuringiensis or spinosad. If you want to go the synthetic route, you can use malathion or carbaryl. Depends on what your ethics are, how you want to control those. Aphids, aphids are challenging to keep a handle on. The best method of getting rid of them, of course, is just to take the end of a hose and get a strong stream and just kind of wash them off. Or you can use insecticidal soap, but you don't need to go the route of using malathion or carbaryl on insects like aphids. If you have a really heavy infestation, you might want to pitch the plant, right? But try to get rid of them as best you can using those kind of methods. And then there's cutworms. They are moths. They're large moths that will lay eggs on the ground, and you come out to your plants, everything looks great one day, and the next day you come out and it looks like everything's been like a beaver has gone through the forest, right? The plants have just been toppled. What these larvae do, what the caterpillars do, is they just girdle that plant. So the best way to get around that, if if you've got a toilet paper roll, the inside of that little cardboard tube, just cut down a little circle, right, to about an inch and a half long, and just surround the base of that plant. These critters will not get through that. They don't climb over it, right? They just kind of crawl along the ground and take out your plants that way. And of course, because they're moth species, you can use products that contain Bacillus thuringiensis. Other diseases you may encounter may not, alternaria leaf spot. I'm just showing you this to you so it will help you to identify this. I am a little bit long in the tooth as far as this program goes. We've been going almost an hour now, and I thank you for your time. So I'm not going to get in depth into these particular pathogens, rather just letting you know that you may encounter alternaria leaf spot, or you may get something like brassica black rot, which is bacterial. Just this exposes you to what a fungal pathogen looks like. Typically, those are on the left-hand side, typically almost like a target looking decay on the leaves themselves. Bacterial is a different story, it looks a different way. Anyway, just familiarize yourself with that, or if you have challenges with your plants and you want to know a little bit more about them, send images to your Brazoria County Master Gardeners. I'm sure they have a call center or a method for getting in touch with them, or your horticulture agent, Kimberly Mayer. One you will encounter more on members of the plant family that has squash, Cucurbitaceae, right? Powdery mildew. It's an infection that can accumulate and spread during cooler season. And the best treatment for that is just to use resistant varietals that if you're scoping out plants, just look for those that may be resistant to powdery mildew, or adjust your watering schedule, which may be a little tricky in the Gulf Coast with a lot higher humidity. Or you can apply um, products that we look at having fungicidal properties to them. They're not true fungicides, but ones that you can use and are appropriate to use in a vegetable garden, like potassium bicarbonate or neem oil or dusting sulfur. Anyway, well, folks, I hope you were enjoyed this program and that you got a little bit out of this. I know I rushed towards the end a little bit, but we're here to help you to produce and a bountiful harvest for your fall gardening experience. You can work with plants at this time like radishes, carrots, and beets, carrots, cabbage, and kale, as well as daikon if you have enough depth. Daikon is a kind of a radish. It's part of the Asian culture. They'll come in about 55 days. Really quick turnaround for a long radish. This is an example of how big that plant can get. That is a 2 foot long um, taproot, right? 4 inch in diameter. Compare that to a size 8 women's shoe. How do I know the size of that shoe? That's my wife's shoe, by the way. So you can get really good production out of them. You can reference these websites, of course, go to extension. For us, it's Brazos County, but for you, it's going to be Brazoria County. The Brazoria County Master Gardener's website, I apologize for not updating this for your area. It's txmg.org/Brazoria. There is great information from the Bluebonnet Master Gardeners, which are very close by to y'all as well as us. If you want to know how to build a raised bed, there's a YouTube video on that that has been created by the Starr County Master Gardeners. And then what vegetable resources you can find online for Agri Horticulture. Well, folks, thank you very much for your time this evening. My name is Stephen Brueggerhoff, horticulture agent serving Brazos County in the Brazos Valley region. I also host a radio show, call-in radio show called Garden Success on KAMU FM 90.9. Every week, I'm there except for when I'm not. Anyway, if there are any additional questions, I'm more than happy to hang around a little bit, Joanne.
Thank you, Stephen. That was a really interesting presentation. And while you were talking, we had a couple of master gardeners that do have experience with growing kohlrabi and dropped some information in the comments. So we're supporting you and supporting each other.
Ah, fantastic.
Thank you
Well,
again, Stephen. We appreciate it.
thank you, Joanne.